Our scripture passage for this morning comes from a couple of places. Psalm 99, verses 1 through 5, and then Matthew 6. All right. The Lord is king, let his peoples tremble. He sits enthroned upon the cherubim, let the earth quake. The Lord is great in Zion. He is exalted over all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he. Mighty King, lover of justice, you have established equity, and you have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Extol the Lord our God. Worship at his footstool. Holy is he. And now Matthew 6, verses 9 through 13. Jesus says, "Pray then in this way, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one." This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
Lent is the season in which we remember that whatever we have, however much, however little, is not all that we need. So we come seeking something deeper, something more. And during these days of Lent, what we're seeking is to ask Jesus to once again teach us to pray. And we'll be going through the Lord's Prayer together, one phrase at a time. Last week, Our Father. Today, hallowed be your name. It was Sunday. The family had just come home from church or sitting around the Sunday dinner table. 6-year-old Bobby is lost in thought, and he's tracing designs in his mashed potatoes with his fork. But then he gets his thought, and he interjects something into the parents' conversation. He said, "How come we don't call God by his name?" His mother says, "What? You heard me, Mom. How come we don't call God by his name?" "I don't understand." Bobby says, "Well, every Sunday we go to church and we say, 'Hallowed be your name.' Why don't we call him that name?" Bobby, he may be on to something. Not just why don't we call God hallowed, but why don't we pay more attention to the sanctity, the holiness of God? It's interesting, last week, Jesus invites us into this prayer language. Beginning, the word is Abba, Daddy, Papa. It is familial, it is imminent. And now, over against that, Jesus holds in this kind of creative tension the transcendence, the otherness of God. The word hallowed, of course, is in the Testament. It's a Greek word. And it is rooted in another Greek word, hagios, meaning holy. Holy is your name. See, in the Bible, names were more than labels. They were reflections of a person's identity and character. Only God is holy, just as only people are human. And to say that anything else is holy is to say that it has something of God's mark upon it. We're talking here about reverence, a sense of reverence toward God. It was Chief Justice Potter Stewart some years ago said, "You know, I'm not sure I can define pornography, but I think I can recognize it when I see it." Now, reverence, it may be hard for us to define, but I think we know it when we feel it. It has a kinship with wonder, awe, deep respect. The classical philosopher Paul Woodruff said, "Reverence is that virtue that keeps us from trying to act like gods. When we forget that we're only human, that's when we try to act like God. It's the opposite of reverence." How many times have I said this phrase, "Hallowed be your name"? Sometimes, of course, it will become rote. It just rolls off the tongue. Do you think we really grasp the magnitude of that? The ancient Hebrew people did. They were so courteous. They were so careful about the name of God, particularly saying it out loud. If you said that name, God, out loud, that would put the speaker in jeopardy, because they thought to say that name out loud, it was like to release the power of 1,000 thunderstorms. For them, the most powerful name they had for God was Yahweh. How many times do you think in the ancient Hebrew world they said that word? Once a year. Once a year. Then only by the high priest in the Holy of Holies. Now, my mother said the word more than once a year, but I think always with care. I remember that. We had these Advent devotions that she would set up. We had a little kind of worship center in the foyer upstairs. And my 2 sisters and I, every night during Advent, there was an Advent candle. We would light it, and it would go down 1 notch every night, moving toward Christmas. We had this fold-out cardboard pictograph that you had these little envelopes that would open. There would be pictures on them, and you open, the scriptures would be there. Now, a lot of times she let the 3 of us take turns leading. And, well, sometimes it went well, but then sometimes our leading went into kind of giggling and pinching and squirming. What I recall is it always had a different air about it when Mother led. Not because she was so serious or strict. There was something about the way she lit the candle. It was something about the way she cradled the Bible in her hand. But most of all, it was about the way she said the name, the word God. Oh, I don't mean she was all preacherly and pious and epical in tone. I always had the feeling, though, when I heard her say that name, she drew her breath with great care. Now, my mother was not a real critical or judgmental person, but she was bothered by a lot of loose talk about God. I'm not talking so much about people taking God's name in vain. She was bothered most by church people, flitting about, using God's name so glibly, so easily, God this and God that. That bothered her at times. We're talking, about reverence. Hallowed be your name. This God can't be kind of wheeled around by any human fancy or whim. This God is free, omnipotent, sovereign. Oh, we love to whittle God down, reduce God down to our size. Oh, we love to kind of build a tower like the Tower of Babel, promoting ourselves to God. But do you know the grief that comes when we obliterate the otherness of God? Oh, we can turn God into nothing but a cheerleader for the American way. Or we can turn to God as a cosmic bellhop or Federal Express. We're no longer dealing with the God of all creation. We're dealing with the cheap dime store reproduction of a God whittled down to our image. I think that's why Jesus began this prayer, by making it familial, our Father, but then also helping us to understand we're dealing with someone larger than us, someone who would come up with an idea of what it means to be fully human we might not know if left to our own devices. I think Jesus knew that so much of the spiritual apathy of his day was because people had become deaf and blind to the mysterious impingings of God's way in the world. What we're talking about here today when we're talking about reverence, don't leave it 3 feet off the ground. This has to do with how we relate to our world. Some of you remember the comedian Rodney Dangerfield? Okay. Do you remember he had a catchword, a favorite lamenting phrase? Remember what it was? Yeah, I don't get no respect. Remember that? I don't get no respect. We need to tell Rodney, neither does anyone or anything else in the world where God's name is not hallowed. The holiness of God is kind of like a center tent pole. When you put it up, a lot comes up with it. When you pull it out, a lot collapses. All those things that have the mark of God upon it, it's no longer sacred. Oh, we like to throw around phrases like the sacredness of motherhood, the sanctity of a person's word, the dignity of a human being, but those easily become hollow, empty phrases when you pull out the center tent pole. Long time ago, it really was a long time ago, I was a youth minister. That's how I began in ministry. We had a good summer this particular summer, and we wanted to have a culminating experience. It was going to be a worship experience. It was going to be lakeside, and we wanted to make it just authentic and genuine. And one of the older boys in the youth group said, my dad is a master woodworker, and he has this beautiful hardwood table. I think we could put it in the truck and he would let us use it. And one of the girls in the group said, my mother and I have done some tapestry and we have these table covers. I think we could use one of those. And some of the kids, they went out and they picked a bunch of wildflowers. A girl in the group made a loaf of bread. We had the loaf, we had the cup, we had the flowers, the table, the cover, candles. You know, sometimes things come together, and that was one of those worship experiences. I don't know exactly why. It was the people, the time, the setting, the music. It just came together in a spiritual kind of fusion. And at the end of the service, you know, usually you got a bunch of adolescents. They're going to be running around like banshees. But no, they were kind of walking carefully because I think the ground had become a little bit like holy ground. Well, it was over. So now the parents are showing up, and 4 or 5 dads are talking, and they're standing at the edge of the table I described to you. And some of us looked over, and the dad flipped out his pack of Marlboros, and he pulled out a cigarette, and he walked over to the candle, and he lit his Marlboro. I know. Look, a table's a table. A candle's a candle. I shouldn't make too much of it. But some of us that were there saw that and felt something was missing. You know? Something was missing. What happens to a world that puts out all the sacred fires? Everything becomes flat, drab, one-dimensional. Any moment is just one more moment in the string of days. The birth of another first one, just another human unit added to the other human units. It's an event to be recorded and regulated. The death of a dear friend, it's just another unit written off the record. What we feel here in worship, when the organ and the voice and the rhythm and the rhyme, the choir, the congregation sometimes all get together and you feel yourself filled with something, don't do too much with that, because in a world of mechanical efficiency, that can be explained into oblivion. Falling in love, it's just a chemical reaction. Put out the sacred fires and a boss cannot become a spiritual leader. A house will not become a home. An instructor will not become a guide, a teacher. If we've lost reverence, how do we grow it? How do we regain it? It is a virtue, and it has to do with the habitualizing of feelings and perspective. And I imagine it's, you could say, it's harder to learn than to forget. You know, you can take the finest violin in the world and stick that violin in a closet for 10 years. It will not keep its tune. Pull it out of the closet, put the bow to it, and the sound will be horrific. You can have the best equipment in the world for reverence, but if these feelings are not played upon it over the years, it just gets out of tune. How do we grow reverence? Jesus, I think, helps us. He says, by hallowing the name of God. Isn't that at the core of a lot of what we do here in worship? We don't come here just to talk about God or to say certain things about God. We come to bump into something greater than ourselves, to have our smallness absorbed into a largeness. I think another way we do that is by paying attention and recognizing times, places, events, moments that confront us with which is beyond our creation or control. Now, God meets that criteria, but so do birth, death, nature, truth, justice, wisdom, all the things that have the mark of God upon it. They're holy too. I know a Native American elder, he teaches courses on reverence. He said, this is what I do. He said, I point the student to the nearest tree. And then I ask that student, do you know you did not make the tree? And if the student says yes, I say, that student's on the way to reverence. Okay. I have a friend in Haywood County, lives out in Crabtree. It's an old family farm. Stream runs through it, highland meadows, and at the top of the meadow, there's this ridge line that's covered with hardwood, ancient hardwoods. He doesn't know how old they are. Some of them, you get 2 or 3 people together up there and you can't get your arms around the girth of them. He doesn't know how old they are, but he knows when you go up there, you have to crank your head all the way back to see their top. And he knows that under that canopy, a bright Carolina summer day will be in the twilight. He doesn't make a big deal about it. He doesn't get a group together. He just goes up there sometimes, and under that canopy, he said, I have been known to lose it and just shout, glory, or hallowed be your name. How about paying attention to the things in your life that have become sacraments? Rightly regarded, just about anything can become a sacrament. Visible, ordinary, everyday things that are portals to the invisible. How about the table I talked about earlier, the candle? How about a family meal? Not the kind of family meals I hear about a lot recently, you know, the individual feeding troughs, everybody goes and eats in their own room, in front of their own computer, their own TV. No, I'm talking about a real family meal, around the table. Thanks is given. The day is shared. And what does the family discover? That they discover not only their need for food, their need for each other. That's visible, a portal to the invisible. Hallowed be your name. I really believe what we've been talking about here this morning isn't just about feelings. It's not just about perspective. It's about how we aim our lives. How do we know how to live if we haven't figured out the source and where life comes from? But once we hallow God's name, we say, oh, that is the name above all names. And so my life becomes an attempt to honor that name. Christian people sometimes like to get together and we love to sing these songs, and sometimes these songs are rather pious sentimentalities about Jesus, but then we don't do anything to offer hope to the grieving neighbor. Look, human holiness is an attempt to know, is an attempt to honor the true character of God. God has bound God's self to this world in willful love. And we honor God when we honor what God honors and loves. One of my heroes growing up was Albert Schweitzer. I think I was a 5th or 6th grader and saw this documentary film on it. It was black and white. It was an old film, but I was moved by just the breadth and depth of his life. He was an unbelievable biblical scholar, theologian, philosopher. He had a phrase that was at the core of so much of his writing. It's called reverence for life. Schweitzer one day said, of course we hallow God. We show reverence to God when we light a candle upon God's table. But he said, maybe we honor God most of all when we attend a sick child, to feed a hungry woman. And it was that sense that led him from Europe to go to equatorial Africa, to a place called Lambarene, and he opened a medical clinic, and he gave his life to pushing back the darkness of illness and disease in Africa. What some of you don't perhaps know about Albert Schweitzer is he was a master musician, a world-class organist, and he actually raised support for the mission in Lambarene by going back to Europe, coming to the States, and giving these packed organ concerts. He loved to work with the masters and particularly loved Bach. Now, Corey will tell you, a real organist knows that they're going to be a real organist. They're going to have to be able to play some of the best works of Bach. And Albert Schweitzer loved Bach. He tells this story. One day he was dockside at Lambarene, and he was telling goodbye to a nurse who was going back to France. And he said, before you get on the boat and before you leave, I want to tell you something that happened 2 months ago, involved you, involved a little girl. I haven't forgotten it. He said, you remember the little girl? We said we could not break her fever. We could not find out what we thought she was not going to make it. But you took her into your room that night and you cared for her while you slept. He said, I was 2 rooms away, and I can remember as those hours went by, I could hear her screams. I could hear her agonies of pain. But then it must have been 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. She was still whimpering, but the tone changed. I knew the fever had broken, and I knew that she would live. And Schweitzer said, you know, people call me something of a musician, but he said, I want you to know what I heard that night was better than Bach. It was the sweetest sounds I have ever heard on this earth when her cries changed. Schweitzer wasn't belittling Bach. He was honoring an infirm little girl and a compassionate nurse, and he was hallowing the name of God, who honors above all the dignity of every one of us made in the image. Raise the tent pole. Live a life of reverence, and so much will come with it. It could change how you feel, what you see. and how you live. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name.